So hello. Okay, so we're basically going to edit our CSS that we've developed after exporting from InDesign to HTML. So I've just got on the screen at the moment the InDesign document because I just want to remind you of a couple of things that I've done before I then export this again to HTML, just to sort of remind you of that process. I know we covered it in the last video, but just a couple of things. So the first thing is you can see here the Dramatis Personae. Now I've actually changed this from my table. I had it originally as a table, and I've actually changed it back to text. For simplicity. Now I can also explain to anybody how to deal with it if you've got it as a table, but to be honest, for those of you that this is the first time doing anything with HTML, it may be a little bit easier just to deal with this as a simple text rather than as a table. Not that it's impossible, but I just want to give you, the simple approach to this. The other thing that I've done, of course, is to create a table of contents, which you can see on the screen right now. So we've basically got these acts and scenes and Dramatis Personae. There's the only things that we really need in the table of contents. This will, of course, become our navigation, which brings me to just one final point before we export again, making sure that these separate objects, so I've selected now this text object, and you want to make sure for this one, that we've actually got in our object styles, we've actually got, let's bring that back up on the screen again. So in our object styles, we've got a table of contents. I've just called it TOC, TOC. That's not really important, but what is important is the export tagging part of this. So for the export tagging, you really need to make sure that tag is called nav. So as you probably realized by now, you do have some items that you can select from the drop-down list, but that's fairly limited from P for paragraph through the levels of heading. But we can actually type into here, and I've given that the tag nav. That is an appropriate HTML tag to build the navigation. Okay, so that's that one done. The other thing is that these two objects also need to be objects with export tagging, and if we go now to the Dramatis Personae as an object, and then we're going to look at export tagging, that's actually a section with the class name of Dramatis, and the play, which I've selected here, that is also an object. The object style, it doesn't matter what it looks like, we're not really concerned about that. We're just looking at the export tagging, making sure that that's section and play as a class name. So when I export this as HTML, which I'm going to do now, export to HTML, I want to make sure that I've got a folder to put it in so that these things are separated from the rest of the content. So I'm basically just going back to my location, and I'm going to create a new folder. In this particular case, I'm going to call it Play version 4. Simply because I've done this a few times before, just for the demonstration. Okay, so let's create that, and we're saving it in here. Now, we want these things are already saved from the previous time. So if you do this once and do it again, you're going to find that all of these settings will be saved. However, I'm just going to go through it again quickly. Same as articles panel, map to unordered lists. Images, you need to use the original. You need to have them as best quality as you possibly can, so I'm going for maximum quality. I want to make sure that it's relative to text flow. This is very, very important because you don't want to limit the size of the image. We want to be able to, any images that you put in here, you want to be able to flow according to the space that we've got. In other words, make them responsive and not just fixed to one particular width or height. So we'll go for the relative to text flow. Nothing else to do here. Under advanced, however, we need to make sure that we include the classes in the HTML. We don't want to generate the CSS, but we do want to add the style sheet that we've previously downloaded, that I've given you. Okay, I'm going to actually just do that again. I'm going to add that style sheet, and I'm now looking for that. I think I've got a copy of that in my downloads folder. Okay, so I'm using that CSS to be able to edit the CSS, because that CSS that I've given you has already got the style, the elements from the HTML ready for you to style. So let's actually do that now. So I'm clicking OK. And we straight away get an example of what this looks like. So it will fire up the browser just to show us what that looks like. You can see it's pretty basic at the moment. We haven't got really anything going on apart from the slight difference in weight for the headings and so on. But basically everything is just sort of banged in here. Now these actually should work. So we should have the navigation working. If it's not working, there may be some issues to do with the file naming, making sure that you don't have any spaces in the file name. So if this doesn't work, you might need to revisit that. Go back to InDesign, rename the file without any spaces in it, and just run through that again. I advise you to check this first before you go any further with this. Okay, so we can actually just close that down now, because what I'm planning to do now is hide my InDesign. I don't need to look at that now, but what I need to do now is to go to where I'm working in my folder, and I'm looking for Play version 4. So it's very important then, just to reiterate this, making sure that you create a folder especially for this export means that that is one isolated project which I can now open in VS Code by dragging that folder onto my VS Code icon. Or if you prefer, you can actually just go to VS Code and say open folder and open that folder. Now this, as you can see now, is asking me if I trust the authors of this, which of course I do because it's just me. And now we can see here is the actual HTML that we've created. Now don't be too put off by this. It looks very complicated. To a certain extent that's InDesign overdoing things really for us and giving everything an ID when we don't really need it. But you can see here that we've actually got the nav item here. Now one of the things you can do with VS Code, just to sort of help you understand what we've got here, if we click in these little down triangles, you can see that it actually does reduce that down to the very, very basic. So it hides or folds those elements, separating them out. So here we have the nav with a class name of Tok. Here we have the section with a class of Dramatis, and here we have the play equally. So we can just look at these things just very quickly, just have a quick identification of what's going on here. Let's look at the play, for example. So there's our heading. First of all, H1 with an anchor in it so that it enables us to have the navigation. So in other words, this A tag is, if you like, the place where the navigation leads to. And then you can see we've got H2 is with a class of first scene, and then we've got the location and so on. So all of these things should work properly. We've also got a figure, so you can see we've actually got this figure here with the image inside it. So I've got 6 images or more in my, I can't remember, but I've got basically all of those things in here. And then lots and lots and lots of verse lines like this. Now, in my case, I did actually use a special technique to put the first line, or sorry, I should say the character name along the first line of the speech so that it's right on that same line. And the way that I did this means that there is actually a tab between the character name and the first line of the speech. Now, when we create HTML with a tab, this basically means that we're going to have space. It's just empty space because tabs do not count for anything in HTML. So what that means is that we have to actually have a span around it, and that's what we've actually got here. So we've got a span tag here. You can see here. Now, if you don't have that, again, that's something you might need to revisit in your InDesign before you export, because you will need to put a export tagging for that particular style that you use, the character style that you used for the character name. So revisit that if this is not working for you, because basically what we need to do is to provide some special CSS for this span tag, which will then position it correctly. I'm going to come back onto that in a moment, but the first thing to do really for us is to take a look at these three objects. And again, I'm going to move later on to the navigation, because that's a special case. So the navigation is something that we'll deal with later, but initially what we can do is to look at these two sections, the dramatis personae and the play. We'll look at those two sections. Now let's actually just see what this looks like in with our Go Live server. So I'm starting that up at the moment. So here we have it. And as in my usual technique, what I tend to do is to go to my CSS, which you can see is here, the Play CSS, and I'm going to do some very basic things to begin with. So let's actually look at the dramatis. For the dramatis, I'm going to put a border of 1 pixel solid green, like so. And for the play, I'm going to do something similar, except I'm obviously going to make it a different colour, like so. Okay, now you should see now over here that we've actually got a border around the dramatis personae and a border around the whole play. But of course, what we need to do, of course, is to actually put these into, make them sit nicely in the body of the page. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to, for both of these objects, I'm going to give them a width of, say, 65%. And I'm going to do the same for both. But of course, what that means is that will actually then put them, over to the left, because everything is left aligned naturally. And then what I'm going to do is to actually put them in the center, and I'm going to do this by using a margin. I'm going to put a margin at the top of, say, I don't know, say 3 EM, and a margin left and right of auto. And I'm going to just do exactly the same for both of these things. Okay, I'm keeping them separate at the moment because I want to make sure that I don't, that I've got the ability later on to address them separately. But I will. It is possible, of course, to give both of them, to put the dramatis and the play together and give them exactly the same attributes. Now I should also point out, because you're maybe wondering, we don't generally need to put section there. We can just put dot dramatis, in other words, just pushing our information for the class name. However, to make it clear what we're addressing, I have actually done it in longhand, if you like, so section dot dramatis, just to make sure that we understand what we're targeting. But to say that word section is actually optional, because we've only got one object with a class name of dramatis. Anyway, so that's probably a little bit narrow, as you can see. However, it is a percentage, so you see it will actually extend out. Now, the first thing that's kind of bothering us, of course, is the images themselves are far too big. So what I'm going to do with this then is I'm going to look at this. Now, what we actually have here, depending on how we've actually organised our images, I've put them in a figure. So I've given the object, the image in InDesign has an object name, an object class, and that is that tag is figure. And I've, if we just again analyse our HTML, you can see on our first image here, we've actually got it inside a figure. So a figure there with a class name of scene image, but the image is inside that. So the first thing we need to do really is to look at the figure itself. We don't really need to worry about the class name because we've only got one figure in this case. So I'm going to go back to my CSS, and I've actually got to put this in because we don't actually have figure at all. So that's not part of the template that I've provided you with, but I'm going to give this a width of 100%. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, well, I've got to spell it correctly, of course, so that it makes some sort of sense. Now you can actually ignore some of these items in my copy of the CSS. For example, the div scene image isn't correct because in actual fact that's actually now a figure, not a div. And also we don't have a tag for image, I don't think. I just have a quick look down here. No, so we need to actually put in a tag for image. So img, and then the width of this should just be 100%. That is to say, if we want this to be sitting, you know, exactly at the same width as the basic text here, as the content. So you can see that we've now got that displaying, and it is a percentage over of the whole body. Obviously, if we wanted to change that, if we wanted this to be, say, something more like, well, we could do it on the figure, because obviously the image is sitting inside the block called figure. So if we gave the figure a width, say, of 50%, then you see that it is 50%, but then of course that's sitting to the left again because of the fact that it's always going to be left aligned. So therefore what we would need to do here is to take figure and again give it that margin left and right of auto, and we can do that again. I'm going to give this a slight space top and bottom as well, so there we can see it's working like that. Now we need to in a way start addressing the text. So let's have a look and see how we can address the text. Now, I don't like that at the moment, the way that this is not aligned with the text. But anyway, we'll worry about that in a moment. So at the moment, we've already got some left spacing for the text. And the way that we've got that is if we actually look up here. Okay, let's have a look. Yeah, I've already produced that in this section here. So you can see there's a margin on the right of 8 EM. Now, what I've got in my case is, and again, I'm going to look back at this. If we look at, say, the character before the speech, we've actually got this information here. We've got a span. Let me just expand that out a little bit. So we've got a span there, something called the class name of character before speech. And what we actually want, if you look at the word Theseus over here, we want that to be shifted over to the left. Now, if we actually shift it over the same amount that we're already shifting the rest of it over, so we're shifting everything over to the right by 8 EM, if we shift that back by 8 EM, then what we actually should get is the text aligning to the left. So, so what we actually have, the way that we will do that, and I'm gonna actually just put this in at the bottom. In fact, I can just remove it there. I'm going to put it in here. Okay, and then I shall explain to you what's actually going on. So what we will do is use something called position. So I've put that in here now. The first thing is, a span is normally an inline element. That is to say, it's within the text. So what we want to do, first of all, is to turn that into a block level element. Now we can actually do that by saying display block. So that in a way sort of almost automatically puts it into another type of object, because it's almost like a paragraph in itself now, because it's a block level element. And then what we can do is to use position. So position is a way of moving an object into a particular location. Now, when we use position relative, all we're basically doing is giving it a value X and Y, you know, in other words, what amount do we want to move this left and right or up and down? What values do we want to give that from its original position? So that's why we call it relative. I mean, and we're not going to go into other types of position at the moment, but something like, for example, absolute would mean that it would fix it according to the overall dimensions or the overall dimensions of the body itself. So then it would always be, you know, in that location. Whereas here we know where it is right now. We want to move it from that position. So we want to move it to the left of 7. I'm going to actually put -7. As if you remember, we've got 8 EM, and we're moving it back 0.7. 7 EM. We're moving it back 7 EM. I shall get my tongue around this properly in a moment. So we're also moving it now from the top down. We're moving it down 1 EM, so that it then is at least in the right position. Oh, you'll see. Now the width of it again is something quite different, because we want to make sure that this does not actually expand out into the line of the speeches. So we can limit it this way. Now what that would mean is if you have a character name that's longer than one word, then that would actually break it at that point, so that you actually have those two words would then go onto 2 lines. Okay, let's actually have a look and see how this works. Okay, there we have then. I've actually increased the size slightly, and given it a very slightly larger size. It's not quite right, because at the moment, as you can see, if I now make this -8, I think it would actually shift it right over to the left, which is slightly too much. So maybe we just need to go to 7.5. And that seems a little bit better. I've also made it slightly larger, although I'm not 100% sure whether that's working for me. Let's just actually see what that does if we. Yeah, so as you can see, as we increase or decrease the size, then this gap here decreases. That's because we're using the EM unit, which is relative to the font size. So we've actually got to be careful with that. If we now make this -8 again, then you'll see that will actually go back to being right over to the left, where it should be. But that's, yeah, it's not quite right, but I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But anyway, let's leave it like that. That's pretty good. We could actually just use a pixel value, but then it wouldn't necessarily be so easy to relate it to the actual size of the text. Okay, so that's solved that one then. Now, if you didn't do that for your own version, then you're going to simply have the text you have the character name sitting above or on the line above of the first line of speech, which is fine too. That's perfectly acceptable as well. So okay, so let's leave it at that now. Let's actually look at some other things. Let's, for example, look at ACT. And for ACT, we can do all sorts of things here. So let's actually, for a start, let's actually give it a background color. We'll make it some kind of slightly blue, and then give it a color of white. Okay, then we want to maybe make that go into the center. American spelling of center. And then we want to actually make that background a little bit bigger so that the text sits in the middle of it. And I do that with a margin. So we're going to go for margin overall, say 8 pixels. And then a padding equally. We'll change that to padding for the moment. Okay, that's better. Now we probably want to increase the size of that, so I'm going to make that font size. Let's say we're going to make that font size 120% of what it normally would be. That's not right either. So I'm going to make that 2em. That's, in other words, double what it would normally be. Okay, that's better. Now, equally the scene, I think for the scene, and of course that will be first scene and scene, again, you'll want to probably think about how you want to define that. Now, we just have scene, we don't have first scene in this, but what we can do, yes, we do have it there actually. So we can actually make them behave in the same way to begin with. And what I'm going to do is to take out, I'm just going to do it here. So I'm going to take out H2 because we don't really need it, and put comma scene. And then what I'm going to do is to give it a different size for a start. Or we'll also make it text align center. I mean, these are choices that you've got. I'm just basically going through it myself just to give you a few clues. And then we're going to provide a margin at the top of, say, 2em. Possibly too much. Okay, and then what we're going to do is to again increase the size of this. So I'm going to say, we can also give different typefaces, of course, but for the moment we'll leave it as it is. And I'm going to go for 1.8. I think this margin at the top is a bit too much, so I'm going to say 0.5. Okay, that's a bit better. Now the location is down here, and again, once again, we can do something with that. If you like, you can make again more of the background color. You know, we could do something with that. That's just to make it a light color, keeping it black, like this. And again, we might want to make it a line in the center. And then also we might want to give this a padding. I'm going to give the background the color here. I'm going to make a background color of you know, something slightly off-white, say, like so. And then what I'm going to do is again go to each of these sections. Now, in fact, it's just a word about this. At the moment, these objects here, Dramatis and Play, have exactly the same settings. So what we can do, again, just as this is something to learn about with CSS, we can actually give these rules collectively, if you like. So what we can do is to say Dramatis, comma, and then play, dot play. And then in here we can actually say background color white. There we are. So you can see how we can, now we could actually put all of these things in here. I could actually put this in here as well. And then it means that I can, for the moment, I can take these out of here. So I've got no border anymore, I've just got that. Now, just one other thing, I want to make sure that none of my text actually crashes up against the edge of these blocks. So the way I'm going to do that is for these two elements, they're going to have padding inside. So I'm going to provide some padding of, let's say, well, we're not really interested in top and bottom, but left and right, we want to put some padding of, say, let's just give it 1.5 em. Maybe that's a little bit much, but anyway, we can come back to it. In fact, what I will do is to reduce that down to 1 em and make it actually all the way round, so that it sits a bit more comfortably, even top and bottom. Okay, so we've got the basics of it then. What we of course need to be doing next is to look at our navigation, which is currently just sitting over here. But I think that's going to be in the second part of this video. So we'll look at now, after we've done all of our work here, and I say this isn't necessarily finished. I've still got lots of things that I might want to do. And what I'll do is I'll do that offline and then show you what I've achieved, and then we'll look at the navigation.